Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this.
Mm.
You've spent, I don't know,
Mhm.
hours, maybe even days, right?
Yeah.
Setting up your nice new virtualization server with Proxmox.
Yeah.
You're feeling pretty good about it. You hit reboot, waiting for that login, and boom, nothing. Staring at the server's BIOS screen.
Yeah.
Again, every single time.
It's so frustrating.
And if that sounds familiar to you listening, well, you're definitely not alone. This isn't just some technical glitch. In the Homelab world, it's almost like a rite of passage.
It really is.
It sparks everything online, from real troubleshooting to like full-on debates about cable management or even people questioning each other's IT skills.
Yeah, it gets heated sometimes. And what's really interesting, maybe even a bit ironic, is that this super common problem, it often has basically nothing to do with Proxmox itself.
Right. That's the key thing.
Exactly. Proxmox is kind of the symptom, But the actual root cause, that's almost always buried deeper in the server's firmware, the BIOS or UEFI settings. Think of it like a conductor trying to lead an orchestra. If the instruments aren't tuned right, or maybe they're not even facing the stage, the music just won't start. Doesn't matter how good the conductor is.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
You gotta set the stage right first.
Precisely, before Proxmox even gets its turn.
Okay, so our mission today then is to cut through all that confusion. We want to unpack why this happens, drawing on, real-world experiences and maybe a few lessons learned the hard way.
Definitely some hard-earned lessons out there.
We're here to get you up to speed quickly, identify those usual suspects, and give you some actual practical insights.
For sure. And here's the classic scenario, right from the source material we looked at. You download Proxmox, flash it onto a USB stick, run through the installer. Seems like everything went fine.
Yep, looks good.
You reboot.
And nada. Back to the BIOS. Just keeps dumping you there.
And one user, they summed it up perfectly, asking something like, so I've just put Proxmox on this server, but whenever it boots, it goes straight to the BIOS, not Proxmox. How do I make it automatic?
Yeah, that captures that feeling of just hitting a wall, doesn't it?
Totally. But the tricky part is, there isn't just one answer. There are multiple reasons this could be happening, and like we said, some aren't about Proxmox at all.
Okay, so if it's rarely Proxmox's fault, what are the most common reasons? Why does my server suddenly forget it has an operating system installed?
Well, connecting this back to what the community talks about, we get what people call the usual suspects. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, the number one culprit is just boot order misconfiguration.
Really? Something that simple?
Yeah, it sounds basic, but your system might just be set to boot from another drive first.
Yeah.
Or maybe the Proxmox drive takes a second too long to spin up, and the BIOS just skips it because it wasn't absolutely first in line. There was one response online, pretty blunt. Someone said, how do you have a whole server rack, but you can't figure out how to change the boot order?
Ouch. Okay, maybe a bit harsh, but it does kind of highlight how fundamental that setting is, right? Easy to overlook when you're thinking complex thoughts.
Exactly. And the fix is usually straightforward. Dive into your BIOS or UEFI setup, find the boot sequence, and make absolutely sure the drive with Proxmox is number 1.
And if it's a newer system, UEFI.
Right. If your server uses UEFI, which most do now, you also need to check that the Proxmox bootloader itself is actually listed and enabled in the UEFI boot options. Sometimes it installs but doesn't get registered properly.
Okay, boot order first. Makes sense. What's next on the list?
That brings us neatly to suspect number 2, UEFI versus legacy BIOS confusion. This trips up so many people.
Yeah. UEFI, the new way, legacy BIOS, the old way.
Exactly. UEFI is the modern standard, unified extensible firmware interface. Legacy BIOS, sometimes called CSM or compatibility support module, that's the old school method.
And the problem is mixing them up.
Precisely. If you installed Proxmox while the system was in, say, UEFI mode, but then your BIOS is set to boot only in legacy mode, or vice versa, it's not going to find it. They're different worlds.
Right.
One admin put it really well. You have a UEFI issue, not a BIOS issue. That distinction is critical.
So the fix is just consistency.
Yep. Match them up. If you installed Proxmox in UEFI mode, make sure your server's firmware is set to boot UEFI, and usually disable CSM or legacy support. If you installed in legacy mode for some reason, stick with that in the firmware settings.
Okay, matching modes. That seems key, like a simple mismatch, but with big consequences. But, what about those times when it seems like the BIOS is set right? Boot order's correct, the mode matches, but it still won't boot. Are there trickier things going on?
Oh, absolutely. There's another one that's surprisingly common, and Bit more subtle. Delayed storage initialization.
Delaying storage, like the drive is slow to wake up.
Kind of, yeah. Sometimes the storage controller itself, or maybe the physical drive, just isn't fully ready and responsive when the BIOS does its quick check for bootable devices. And instead of waiting, maybe an extra second or two, the system just says, nope, nothing here, and kicks you back to the setup screen.
Wow. So the server's just too impatient.
Pretty much. One user had a smart suggestion. Try disabling all other boot options except the Proxmox drive.
Force its hand.
Exactly. They figured what's probably happening is the Proxmox drive needs time to initialize, and the bootloader just skips it and tries the next thing. Forcing it to only look at the Proxmox drive often solves it, makes it wait.
That's fascinating. Such a simple trigger for that frustrating loop. Okay, what about more serious problems, like with the actual drive itself?
Right, and that leads to the final, more serious, but still common issue, a failing or mispartitioned drive.
Okay, like physical problems or messed up installs.
Both, yeah. If your boot drive is starting to fail, bad sectors, whatever,
Yeah.
or maybe it wasn't wiped completely clean before you installed Proxmox, maybe there were old partitions left over, you could end up with a partial install or corrupt partitions. The BIOS might see something on the drive, but it's not a complete bootable OS.
So it gets confused.
Exactly. One experienced person warned about this, saying something like, looks like maybe a dying drive. It can get weird if you only wipe one partition during a reinstall. Their advice was solid. Wipe the entire drive clean, install Proxmox, and don't try to share that disk with anything else.
That really drives home that point about Proxmox needing its own dedicated disk, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Avoids so many potential headaches.
It's really critical advice, especially for stability. Proxmox should own its boot disk. Don't dual boot on it. Don't carve out weird partitions alongside it. Just let Proxmox have the whole thing.
Makes sense.
And, if you're building a serious home lab, or God forbid, using this for actual work, don't cheap out on that boot drive. Get a decent SSD. It'll always be more reliable and faster than some old spinning disk you had lying around. It just underscores starting with a clean or reliable slate.
Okay, solid advice. Now there's one more big blocker people hit, especially with newer hardware. Secure boot. What's the story there? Why does that cause trouble for Proxmox?
Yes. Secure boot. It's a security feature, right? Designed to stop nasty stuff, malware, from loading up right when the computer starts.
Yeah, it checks for digital signatures.
Exactly. It needs the bootloader and the OS components to be cryptographically signed by a trusted authority. And here's the clash. Proxmox, being open source, its standard bootloader usually isn't signed with the keys that most motherboards trust by default keys, often tied to Microsoft or the specific hardware maker.
So the system sees Proxmox, checks the signature, says don't know you, and stops.
Pretty much. If secure boot is enabled in your firmware settings, it just won't let Proxmox load. Blocks it right at the gate.
So what's the fix? Sounds complicated.
Well, there are two paths. The much easier one for almost everyone is simply to go into the BIOS UEFI settings and disable secure boot.
Just turn it off.
Yeah. For a home lab or even many small business setups, that's perfectly fine, and the standard practice for running things like Proxmox or other Linux distros. The other path is manually signing the Proxmox bootloader yourself with keys you enroll. But honestly,
Sounds like a deep rabbit hole.
it is. If you're running into this specific boot issue, you probably don't want to mess with manual signing unless you have a very specific reason and know exactly what you're doing. Disabling secure boot is the go-to fix 99% of the time.
Okay, that really clarifies the why behind that secure boot problem.
Yeah.
So we've covered the main technical culprits. We mentioned drawing on real-world experiences earlier. Sometimes the best insights aren't just about settings, they're about the people involved. And the very forum post that kind of sparked this whole deep dive, it included a picture of the user's Homelab rack.
Oh, yeah, that picture.
And let's just say it kicked off quite the online discussion.
Yeah, the human element, as our sources called it. The reactions were all over the place. You had people being super supportive, like, finally, a picture of a real home server rack, not some showroom.
Yeah, relatable messiness.
And then you have the other end, pretty harsh critiques like, DDE, sort out your cable management. Just brutal. But then there were these more philosophical takes, too. Like one person saying, if you spend too much time making it look pretty, you're not working hard enough on the actual infrastructure.
That's a classic home lab debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aesthetics versus function. Should it look like it belongs on Instagram, or should it look like a working lab, maybe a bit messy, constantly changing?
Exactly. It's this ongoing tension.
So after all that passionate back and forth, what was the general feeling for those of us stuck somewhere between wanting it neat and just needing it to work?
Well, the consensus seemed to land somewhere practical. Most people agreed that labeled cables are way more important than perfectly neat, symmetrical bundles. Function over form, basically.
Ah, practical wisdom.
And hey, for the record, in that original post, the user's cables are actually labeled, so maybe the critics missed that part.
Huh. Okay, good for them.
But it highlights that community wisdom, right? Don't panic if Proxmox won't boot. Start with the basics. Boot order, UEFI settings, check the drive's health, keep it simple. Let Proxmox have its own disk. Test things before you rely on them.
Right.
And, sometimes if it's really critical, maybe for business, you might need to swallow your pride and hire someone, as one pro put it bluntly. If this is for a company, consider hiring it out. If it's just for fun, keep on rocking.
That's really solid, grounded advice. So,
Yep.
wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you listening right now, maybe tearing your hair out over a server stuck in BIOS? Why do these things keep dropping up?
Honestly, because servers can be quirky. BIOS and UEFI firmware have their own personalities, shall we say. And virtualization just adds another layer on top.
Yeah.
A boot problem like this, it's very rarely about Proxmox itself being broken. It's almost always about how that underlying server firmware is set up, or, as we've seen, often misconfigured.
But the good news is, once you get those fundamentals right, the boot mode, a healthy disk, the right boot order Proxmox itself is usually incredibly stable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's designed for uptime, for resilience.
Yeah.
But like any powerful tool, it expects the foundation to be solid. You got to set the stage correctly.
Okay.
So if you are wrestling with that server that just won't boot Proxmox, don't immediately assume the worst or overcomplicate it. Here's your checklist, basically boiling down everything we've talked about.
All right, let's recap. First, always set the correct boot order in your BIOS or UEFI. Make absolutely sure that Proxmox drive is number one.
Second, and this one's huge, match your UEFI and legacy modes. Remember how we installed it versus how the firmware is set to boot? Get those aligned. Like that admin said, it's a UEFI issue, not a BIOS issue.
Right. Third, know that secure boot often gets in the way. So you'll probably need to go in and disable secure boot. That's usually the easiest path.
Yep. Or, much less common, deal with manual signing if you absolutely have to. And finally, don't forget the basics. Check your storage. Is the drive okay? Maybe try a reinstall, but wipe the drive completely clean first. A failing or badly partitioned drive causes chaos.
And remember, Proxmox really likes to own its disk.
It really does. For stability, give it the whole drive.
And just to bring it back to that fun human element for a second, that whole online debate about pretty racks versus working racks.
Yeah.
The takeaway was clear, right? Labeled cables matter more than perfect cable art. Practicality wins.
Totally. Your Homelab doesn't need to look like an exhibition piece to run like a dream. Proxmox certainly doesn't care how neat your cables are. It cares about a clean boot path. It cares about healthy disks. Solve those fundamental things first, and then you're free to focus on the fun stuff, Spinning up new VMs, playing with clusters, maybe tackling that cable mess later if you ever get bored.